Welcome to another episode of Come Together. Marc Eliot, thank you so much for coming on to the show. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
I really appreciate you making time, especially because you mentioned how busy you are, and looking at your library, it's very clear how busy you keep yourself. You do an astounding amount of work on a really, really wonderfully wide array of topics. And I just want to say, as a podcast host that tries to keep up with that same spirit, I really appreciate all the work that you're doing and that you've been doing.
Well, thanks.
Um,
It's a lifetime of work.
It seems like it. It seems like it. What were you, what got you what were you most passionate about when that got you started? Because you write about politics, you write about music, you write about, cinema and actors and the entertainment world. What got you started?
Well, originally I was in the theater. I was an actor for many years as a child. I did a lot of TV and live theater. I lived in Greenwich Village in the 60s and I fell in with the folk music crowd and became very friendly with a lot of the young, still unknown performers, especially Still Oaks, David Blue, Tim Hardin, people like that, who were on the precipice of becoming quite famous and still are.
Mhm.
I became especially close to Phil Oaks. He was a topical folk singer, very charismatic and a brilliant, brilliant singer and songwriter. He had a beautiful voice. If you've never heard him, you should do yourself a favor and Google him, and you'll be pleasantly surprised. Anyway, after I struggled through undergraduate school at CCNY, City University of New York, majoring in liberal arts, and kind of growing a little bit out of theater, mostly because I didn't like 2 things. I didn't like the environment, and I didn't like the scripts. I thought most of the stuff that came my way was, kind of junky and predictable and mediocre. Uh,
Mhm.
so I was thinking about, uh, making writing more of my profession. Which I had always been writing. I had been writing since I was a kid, but never really thought about it as something to do instead of acting. While
Mhm.
I was at City College, I took a film course as an elective, and I took it because I thought, well, here's 3 credits that I don't have to do anything for, watch a movie, get 3 credits, and get the hell out of there as soon as I can.
Sure.
Um,
I made a
it
similar
it
decision.
Yeah, I think everybody did. At some point or another, you look for those courses. Did you go to the movies? Yes. Okay, you get an A. The course was taught by a fellow named Herman G. Weinberg. Now, Herman G. Weinberg had written a biography of Joseph von Sternberg. People may not know who he is by name, but Sternberg was a director of The Blue Angel, a very famous movie with Marlene Dietrich. He had discovered Dietrich while she was still in Germany as a kind of a nightclub singer, dance hall girl, whatever she was. He fell in love with her. This is Sternberg. And he made 8 movies with her. And each of them was less successful as they were made. The more his obsession with her grew, the less disciplined the films became and more specialized. He would shoot her through gauze. He would do all kind of special effects. He showed all 8 films. That was the course. It was Sternberg Dietrich was the name of the course. And for me, it was an absolute revelation that film, one film of a director was related to another film of the same director. That in order to understand one film, you
Mhm.
really had to see all the films. That opened up a whole new way of thinking about film, writing about film, and acting in film. It just kind of opened everything like a flower in the spring. I finally graduated from City College with a BA, which you might see hanging back there somewhere. And then I was determined to become a writer about film. But my hero at the time, one of my heroes, was Andrew Sarris. Andrew Sarris, for those who don't know, brought auteurism, a French theory of film criticism, to America, and it made him the preeminent film critic of the 70s, 80s, and so on. But mainly in the 70s, when we had a second called the American New Wave, I guess you
Mhm.
could say. Those wonderful films of Scorsese, De Palma, Mike Nichols, all those great independently uh, produced movies as the studio system was dying out. Anyway, a friend of mine came to me and said, "You know, you ought to get your degrees, your graduate degrees, because when your writing doesn't work out, you can then teach." I said, "Are you crazy? What do you mean when my writing? Of course it's going to work out. No, no, you better do it." So I said, I don't want to spend another minute inside an institution. Then he came back and he said, "You know, I'm on the board of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York, in Manhattan." He said, "And Columbia University is starting a film program, a graduate film program that you should get in there
Mhm.
and pick up those degrees in something you like." I said, "I really, and the head of the program is going to be Andrew Sarris." Well, that changed everything. When I realized I had the chance to study with him, reluctantly, I applied to Columbia. I hadn't even taken the GREs. I had no. I had an okay record of grades and all. I didn't think I had a chance, but they were. It was their first year. They wanted students. They were trying to compete with NYU, that had a big film school.
Yeah, very prolific.
Um, and my friend, who was on the board, somehow managed to get a fellowship for me to go. So in effect, I was going for free. And so I bit my tongue and went back to school and spent about 7 years at Columbia, getting my MFA, teaching there, doing my PhD, all of which I had no reason to get because I never planned on teaching. While I was after I took my oral exams for my doctorate, Phil Oakes committed suicide. And he had, by that time, become one of my best friends. We had made a movie together. The previous July, he had said, "Hey, Mark, I want you to make a film with me." Uh, I sure. What's the film? The farewell performance of Phil Oakes. He said, "We're going to shoot it down at Gertie's Folk City, big famous folk club where Bob Dylan began." And he said, "Can you get it together in a couple of days with your friends at Columbia?" And he said, "I'll back, all the expenses." So I went to see all my friends, not so much at Columbia, but I had friends at NPR. A lot of my friends worked on Sesame Street, so they had cameras, they had film or video, they had sound equipment, and they just brought everything down to Folk City. We set up for 3 days, made the movie, and you can tell that, Phil was not well.
Off. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
to say the least. He had some mental issues that eventually won the battle. 6 months later, he was dead of his own hand.
Sorry.
So that really, that changed everything for me on a lot of levels. First of all, the loss of a great friend, a major influence on my creative side, and, someone who had opened up so many ways of approaching subjects that I really hadn't thought about before, combined with Andrew Sarris, who became my mentor in, film. So I felt, in an odd way, reloaded. I went to, I'll tell you a quick funny story. I decided to write Phil's life. So the most I had published were a couple of small articles, and, a couple of college newspaper pieces. I had become the film critic for Penthouse magazine through a crazy quirk of, fate. And the only thing I could say about that is they threw tremendous Christmas parties. Anyway, um, I, bought a book. There was a book that they used to sell in bookstores. You remember bookstores?
I still frequent them every now and then.
Yeah, they're like ancient relics. They're like Ozymandias. It was a book, How to Get Your Book Published, and you could buy it, and it had no value, had no absolutely no value. You get a typewriter, it was that kind of thing. But at the end of the book, they always had a list. It came out every year of agents, literary agents, and that's why everybody bought the book. So I went through the list of agents. And the only agency that, I recognized was the William Morris Agency, because
Mhm.
everybody knew William Morris Agency.
Yeah.
All our grandparents had people who worked at the William Morris Agency in vaudeville and all that, and, William
The
Morris
CAA
is
didn't exist yet, right?
what didn't exist?
The CAA did not exist yet, right?
No,
They were still
CAA
working
came
with
out
William
of
Morris.
William Morris.
Yeah, 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 that's right.
It was a rebel, it was a kind
Michael
of a
Ovitz. That's
yeah,
right.
Mike Ovitz, who had begun at William Morris, so
You
did,
should write about him. He's a cool dude. He's got
I
a
know
crazy
Mike,
story.
therefore I wouldn't be able to write.
Okay.
David Geffen came out of, William Morris also.
Yes. Yes, yes.
Elliot Roberts, who partnered up with who I knew as a kid. Elliot grew up a block away from me.
Wow.
Elliot Rabinowitz, when I knew. Anyway, so in those days, we're talking about, I guess, 78, 79. In those days, you could still do what I did. I took a subway up to Midtown where William Morris was. I walked in, they were in the MGM building, and,
Mhm.
they had a security desk in the lobby, and I said, I wanna go up to William Morris in the writing division." "Okay," they said, "take the elevator to the 16th floor." Those were those days. So I did. I went up to the 16th floor. The elevator's open. There was a reception desk, and a pretty young girl was there, and I said, "Yeah, I'd like to see, an agent." She said, "Well, do you have an appointment?" "No, um, but I have a project." She said, "Well, let me see. I don't know if anybody will see you." And she went, "Oh, we have an agent who it's really his first day, and he has no clients. Maybe he'll see you." So she called him up, buzzed him, and he said, "Alright, send him in." So I went in, and, "How do you do?" Sat down. He said, "What have you got?" He said, "Well, I'm gonna write a book about, Phil Oakes." Never heard of it. Phil Oakes, he everybody else but you heard of him. You're the guy who hasn't heard of him. And I talked to him for about a half hour. He's a folk singer, '60s, Greenwich Village, Bob Dylan, all the buttons. At the end of the half hour, he said, "All right, let me think it over and, call me tomorrow." So I left. Wow. Going back to that book, How to Get Your Book Published, besides agents, they had a list of editors.
Mm.
So in the film that I made, the opening, I wrote an introduction to the book, the only part I wrote, based on the opening of the show, what went on the tumultuous night at Folk City. And I had sent it out to, I think it was 39 editors, and they all came back one by one. No, no. I got a letter from one that said, uh, "This is nicely done, but not for us." So I thought,
Okay.
well, I called him up and I said, "Hi, Mark Elliott, who?" I said, "I wrote this. I sent you a letter, a Phil Oakes thing, and you sent the thing back, meaning not for us. What do you mean by that?" It means we don't want it. And he hung the phone. Uh, the lessons that you learned. And finally, I got a letter from an editor saying, "Look, you have to have an agent. You can't
Mhm.
just send stuff over the transom. Nobody even reads it. It's illegal to read it. Get yourself an agent." So that's when I went to the agent page. That's when I went to William Morris. The next day, I was about to call Mel, my agent, Mel Berger, and my phone rang. So I thought it was William Morris. I picked it up, and on the other end, I heard, "Hi, my name is so and so. We've had your Phil Oakes proposal here for a couple of months. That's how long this has taken. And we can publish it if you don't want too much money. We'll take a chance on it." And I said to him, "You'll have to talk to my agent." "Well, who's your agent?" I said, "Oh, William Morris." And I gave him Mel's number. I hung the phone up and I called Mel immediately. "Let me talk to Mel." Mel gets on the phone. "Who is this?" And I said, "Mark Elliott. I was just there yesterday." He said, I can't, look, I don't, Phil Ox, I don't know, I can't do." I said, "Look, I just got a call from Doubleday. They wanna publish the book, and I told them you were my agent. Hop into a cab, come right up here. I'll be waiting outside. I'll have the contract. You sign it on the taxi door, and, then we'll go up, and I'll call this guy, and I'll get you the deal. He'll get me the deal. I
Yeah,
got
that's
him the deal. His
right.
first deal." So, sure enough, we go up. He calls, I think John was the fellow's name, a kid, a young kid who tried for 3 months to get Doubleday to agree to publish the book. And Doubleday was the last family-owned publisher, which is the only way you could get a book like Phil Oakes published. The corporations wouldn't even hear it. And by the end of the day, I had a book deal. I was a writer, published writer. And that's how I became a professional writer. You couldn't do it today. When I tell young people that story, they, I have a friend who's been trying to publish a book for 10 years and they can't even get to an agent. It's
Yeah.
so difficult today. An agent won't take you unless you're published. You can't get published unless you have an agent. It's a very, very difficult, crazy field. And now with AI, it's even tougher. Um, I did the Phil Oakes book. Doubleday didn't know really what they had, not so much me as a book about Phil. Phil's brother, Michael Oakes, who became a well-known source of photographs, the Michael Oakes archives, he just passed away a few months ago, opened every door. Anybody I wanted to talk to. I moved out to LA, lived with Michael, and spent 6 or 7 months researching that book. When I finally got it all together and the book was published, nobody at Doubleday thought this was going to sell 10 copies. The book came out the first week. The New York Times Sunday Book Review did a half-page review
Wow.
of the book. It wasn't a rave, but it wasn't a bad review. It was a pretty good review. That review made my career.
Indeed. Yeah,
To be in the Sunday Book Review with a half page for a
yeah.
first-time writer, that made my career. The next day, Monday, the publisher called me up. "Come on, we wanna have lunch with you, and, what do you wanna do next? We'd love to sign you for a whole ser" Everything changed, and, from then to now, I've never really been out of work.
That's
So
incredible.
that's how I, became a writer.
I love that. There's so much about that that's so wonderful, and I think that, from my own experience, at least with the podcast world, because similar to the publishing world, I would imagine, every Tom, Dick, and Harry has a podcast or wants to start a podcast or wants something to do with it, right? So you gotta do something to stand out and show that you're a little different, and one of the things that I realized is that everyone's gotta find a way to like, if you wanna make it, you have to be creative about being scrappy, and you have to be creative about, like, forcing opportunity and really, and almost making your own luck. Like, things happen the more effort I found that I put in, the more that things fall into place without any of my intention of it falling into place that way. I don't even know what I kind of am intending for. It just all I just know that I'm putting in the work, and then things are kinda happening as it goes along. And I feel like that's because I think everyone that tries to stick to a formula ends up creating this kind of enormous backlog of everyone trying to do the same thing, and the same system is trying to vet out, everyone that's playing that particular version of the game. But if you're able to circumvent it in some kind of creative way, like what you did. I mean, what you did was really just like you just sold yourself, and you managed to convince someone to both people to bite at the same time. Again, I guess sounds like serendipity, but it's I'm sure it's in no part without the effort that you exerted for months to try to make it happen. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's, serendipity, but it isn't and it isn't. I sent out those 39,
Sure, that's my point.
and I didn't know any better that you can't walk into an
Yeah.
agency. I just said, "Well, I'm gonna go up there. Why not?" It was the times were different. Aggression, some of it came out of ignorance, I didn't know any better. When you
Mhm.
I say you tell people today that story, "Well, how did you can't do that. You have to do this and that." Well, I didn't read the book, so
Yeah, and that's why you're able to make it. I
decision-making.
love that. I
And
love
I
that.
also thought that anybody who heard the name Phil Oakes would immediately want that book. Little did I know, how, uninterested most people were, in publishing about Phil.
Mhm. Right, right. Uh, there's so many places to go, but there's a couple of topics that I wanna dive into, and there's 2 that I care the most to get into, and that is, Springsteen and Disney. Those are the 2 that I think that I know the most about, so I'd like to have an in-depth conversation. But I also wanna talk about Jack Nicholson because you spent a lot of time talking about film and the film world in the 60s and 70s, and, there's a great book that I've referenced in the podcast before called Easy Rider, Raging Bull
Yeah.
about, yeah, and about the development of the creative power over time, as it pertains to movies and film. And the 60s and the 70s were the director's era, and with Scorsese and Spielberg and George Lucas, and I mean, and then everyone was kind of making the way you describe it, these art films that were really character driven and real narrative driven. I've read accounts of everyone scoffing at Star Wars because it was this big commercial, space cowboy movie, and that was so different from what Mean Streets would be or something like that.
Well, it
Um,
wasn't just because it was a space film. What happened was, just to
please,
give you my
yes.
view, I think that, Peter Biskin's stuff is, for the most part, pretty good. Sometimes
Hey everyone, real quick, if you're enjoying the show, click subscribe and rate the show 5 stars. Helps a ton. Thanks so much.
less good than others, but, he's never really been in the business. He looks at the business. What happened with Spielberg and, Lucas is that they didn't wanna be independent filmmakers. They wanted to be studio filmmakers. Spielberg's walking into, was it Fox, or,
Mhm.
I think it was Fox, taking an office and, running into Lou Wasserman and nobody knowing that he wasn't there. These were guys who grew up on studio movies. They didn't
Right,
grow up on independent films like, Scorsese did.
right.
Scorsese grew up on Italian films he saw on Channel 9 in New York, his parents watched every night. Black and white, neorealism. Spielberg and Lucas, what after Star Wars no, after American Graffiti came out,
Yes.
came to Columbia University, where I was at the time, and, he and his then wife, Marcia, sat in, ran a class, and somebody said, "What do you wanna do next after American Graffiti?" Which is basically an independent film done by Zoetrope. That
That's a great
that
movie.
Yeah, great movie, yeah, Francis Coppola produced it. So, he said, "I wanna do Flash Gordon." Now, if you're of a certain age, you grew up with Flash Gordon, Saturday mornings on TV with the Buster Crab, cereal version. If you were my age, you watched it in the movie theaters every Saturday morning, and you worried all week, "How is Flash gonna get out of this?" And then you went back and you forgot that they changed, the thing a little bit so he could survive. That's what Lucas wanted to do. He wanted to be a studio
Gotcha. So they're different
director.
paths. They're different paths.
Yeah, he independence didn't mean anything to him or to Spielberg. Freedom did, and they thought that they could get freedom, in the studio system because all the
Mhm.
heroes, were, directors who worked in the system. So, as but by then, the system had collapsed totally. It had become a TV, distribution,
'Cause they made so much
industry.
money, right? Because TV was making so much money.
Well, it was making money, but they no longer had to, put the money in to feature films and release 1 film, every
Gotcha.
month. They could just grind it out. Same set, same actors, long-term contracts, residuals, run it a million times. So
Okay, Law& and Order
Spielberg.
comes to mind. What's,
Yeah.
Grey's Anatomy comes to mind, Survivor
All
comes
of
to
those
mind.
shows. I mean, not so much for the actors, but, for the producers, it's just, it's a cash register that keeps ringing. So Lucas and Spielberg made a deal with, I think it was Universal. They made a deal with Universal that they would partner up with the studio, where they, in effect, would have their own independent production house with
Mhm.
Universal. And that's how everything changed. That kind of killed off the idea of studio and independent together for anybody else. So you either, worked under that umbrella, or you went into TV, or you made independent films and hoped you could sell them at the new way, which was festivals. Um,
Ah, right.
so that's really what happened, and it begins, as Biskin points out, really with Bonnie and Clyde. It
Yes.
begins then, where what he called New Hollywood, um, displaces old Hollywood. If you saw the Academy Awards this year, the most notable thing about it for me was that there was nobody there. Where were the great stars? And that's always the reason people watch the Oscars, is to see who's there, what they're wearing. This was a group of people that nobody ever heard of except film fan people. So, the wheel turns.
Mhm.
And it turned from the 60s, where teenagers were depicted as beach blanket bingo kids, where the Vietnam War was raging, music was creating a counterculture, campuses were in protest, and Hollywood is making films about Frankie Avalon, singing on a beach. I mean, they were so out of touch by that time. There was nobody wanted to see that. They wanted to see something real, to them. So, the independent film movement began, and what's interesting about it for me, and for Jack Nicholson, is that When everybody left the village, Greenwich Village, and migrated west to films, to a new scene on Santa Monica Boulevard, a new kind of music, there was a group that fancied themselves a combination hippie and beatnik.
Yeah.
Um, uh, um, who was in it? It was Bruce Dern was in it.
Mhm.
Uh, Robert Walker Jr. was part of
Mhm.
that group. The kid who did all the acrobatic dancing in West Side Story, he was in it. A lot of guys who weren't really young, weren't really hippies. They considered themselves kind of
Beats.
literate, yeah, kind of neo beats,
Yeah, yeah.
and they had a group where they would meet in small clubs, and they would get up
Mhm.
and recite poems, and they would write screenplays. One of them was Jack Nicholson, who originally went to Hollywood to be a writer, a screenwriter. He'd gone to high school in New Jersey, in Neptune, New Jersey, right where Bruce Springsteen is comes from. Very creative little place in New Jersey.
Uh-huh.
Whatever they're eating down there, put that in your diet. Um, he tried to he wanted to be a football player, Nicholson. He was too small and couldn't play. He tried baseball. He wasn't fast enough. So he got into a play in high school, and, the magic wand of getting girls swept over him, and, he figured, "Well, that's for me. I mean, this is what I want. I'm gonna do that." And he moved to, California, like all the lemmings and go to where they go. The most beautiful girl in any hometown who says, "I'm gonna be a movie star," goes to Hollywood, and Hollywood is nothing but beautiful girls from small towns who become like every other girl, except there's
Mhm.
somebody like Sydney Sweeney who, you know, is, crème de la crème. But most of them wind up, as other things. They wait on tables for 5 years, and they get a job on a sitcom waiting on tables. "Hey,
Yeah.
I'm an actress." So, this group fell in with, a producer of independent films. What was his name? The guy who did all the, Edgar Allan Poe film. Uh, Cooper, name slipped my mind. Anyway, Corman, Roger Corman. So
Okay.
Corman was making these independent films that cost nothing, and he used all of these actors because they all wanted to be in movies. So Corman said, "Well, I'll put you in a movie. I can't pay you almost nothing, but maybe something will come out of it." And so they all made these crazy films, these low budget, no budget Edgar Allan Poe films, and a whole bunch of crazy vampire stuff. And Jack Nicholson wrote most of them. The other guy who came out of that was Peter Fonda,
Sure.
he did all the motorcycle films. They had Wild Angels and all that was all that was all Roger Corman, who established a really good independent small studio in the '60s. And part of the reason that he succeeded is because there was no competition. Hollywood was in such disarray that a guy like Corman could come and fill a place where
Yes.
Hollywood used to make B movies. Corman made B movies and sold them as A movies.
Mhm.
Mostly drive-ins and Saturday night dating movies. Now, what happened was that, as Biskin tells the story, Fonda hooked up with his partner in Easy Rider, the actor.
Oh, the nutty guy,
Yeah, the nutty guy.
oh gosh. Yeah, I forgot his name. Peter Fonda and, Dennis Hopper.
Dennis Hopper.
Yes.
Hopper was friends with a director who was partnered with a guy with the president of Columbia Pictures. So the president of Columbia Pictures partner in various crimes of cinema was a friend of Dennis Hopper. Hopper went to Peter Fonda and said, "Look, we're making these motorcycle movies. They're junk. I have an in at Columbia Pictures if we can make a movie, a decent motorcycle movie. I can get it made." Now, the two guys I told you about, the president of Columbia and his friend, had already been successful with a TV show called The Monkees.
Mhm.
They had dreamt up the idea of, "Hey, look at the Beatles. We certainly can do that. We'll put it on TV. We'll make
Yes,
a
yes,
full
that's right.
create a
Right.
band," all of
Yeah, yeah,
that.
yeah. I remember reading about this.
Yeah,
Was this the same time, I'm sorry, as the book, Indecent Exposure is going on where, yeah, so that's who that was that Davis that was the head of Columbia at that point?
Dave, yeah, not no,
Clive
not
Davis?
Davis. If you have look up who produced Easy Rider.
Okay, I'll find it. Oh, yeah. Producer of Eas Peter Fonda was the producer, but Bob Raffleson and Bert Schneider.
Yeah, Bert
Ray
Snyder,
Bert
and who was the other guy?
And Bob Rafelson.
Yeah,
Rafelson?
Bob Rafelson, okay. So Rafelson was a director who was a friend of Schneider. Schneider's father had been a big wheel at Columbia, and so with nepotism full blast,
Yes. The whole industry.
Schneider the whole industry, as a whole the whole planet. So, um, Schneider became the head of the, company. They wanted to make a feature film with the monkeys. They said, "Well, was such a big success. Let's make a movie and, put these 4 guys in it, and, we'll make a fortune." They needed a script, and so the only guy they thought had any talent at all was Jack
Jack
Nicholson.
Nicholson. Yeah.
So they hired Nicholson to write, I forgot the name of the film that they did, but it was a monkeys feature, the only feature film.
Mhm.
Head was the name, Head. An apt name because everybody was stoned all the time, especially Jack and, that whole gang. And the film was directed by Bob Rafelson. So then Rafelson, and it was, pretty good. It made some money on it. It's not a great film. I don't think it's gonna go into the Hall of Fame of great movies, but, it was what it was. The monkeys had a moment, and so they exploited it. Jack Nicholson was so depressed by having to work on this idiotic movie, a film called Head, um, with all its meanings, implied. Um, he was gonna drop out of the business. He didn't want to write anymore. Based on the success of, the Monkees movie, Schneider and Rafelson heard about this motorcycle film that, Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper wanted to make, and they decided they would back it.
Yeah. Which was a nightmare, right? It
Uh,
turned
Rip Torn was in it, and, Rip Torn was gonna play the part that Jack Nicholson eventually played, but at Peter Fonda's townhouse in the East '60s in New York, Rip Torn and Peter Fonda got into it. Was it Peter Fonda or was it Dennis Hopper? Dennis Hopper.
Yeah, Dennis
Got into
Hopper.
a fight. That's
Yeah.
it was like in a movie. It spilled out of the brownstone onto the street, doing this, and that was the end of Rip Torn. So they needed someone to play this character. And it's like in a movie where where people say, "Well, what are we gonna do now?" And everybody's head turns to this one guy,
Yeah,
and it's Jack Nicholson.
yeah.
And they say, "Jack, we want you to play this guy. He's a kind of a nerd, and it's the kind of stuff that Jack never wanted to do. But they convinced him. It was a real movie. It was Columbia Pictures. They convinced him to do it, and of course, it made him a star overnight. He stole the picture from everybody. The only thing people remember is this crazy and getting killed while he was sleeping, and that philosophical thing he does about marijuana. It's all people remember from the film and the guys getting their heads blown off at the end. What they did was they touched the zeitgeist of 1969. He's counterculture, pot, heroin,
Mhm.
motorcycles. I mean, it had everything. That era appealed to young people. That
Still
appealed
does.
to young people. It still does. Absolutely, still does. Um, it made Nicholson a star. It made him a bigger star than Peter Fonda. It brought back Dennis Hopper from one of his several trips to oblivion that took place in his career.
Mhm.
He then his next movie was so incomprehensible that again it killed his career for another 10 years.
Well,
Uh,
apparently he was having a hard time even during the filming of Easy Rider in the sense I apparently, like you mentioned with the fight leading up to it, he's becoming less and less manageable as time went on.
well, drugs played a part in it,
I'm sure.
ambition, and no real script. Nobody knew what they were doing. Bob Rafelson is an interesting director. He made a couple of interesting films, but would I put him on the level of Alfred Hitchcock? No.
No, sir.
Um, the follow-up that they made was a film that Rafelson directed for Columbia, Five Easy Pieces. Five Easy Pieces not only confirmed that Nicholson was a star, but it took him out of the hippie thing. It made him a mainstream star in a film that could appeal to a wider audience than hippies or
Mm.
college kids or counterculture. It was a real film, a very good film. Nicholson was superb in it, and that's really how Nicholson, from this way far away turns and twists, like on a roller coaster, it finally leveled off, and he became the biggest box office star of the '70s.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a morality tale for misfits. I mean, this is how you do it if you're a misfit. You become the great misfit. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Timothy Chalamet.
You
Um,
think so?
in that tremendous charisma, hard to cast, off
Very
beat,
diverse in his roles.
yeah. But when he does a role, like that Dylan thing, that
What'd you
awful
think of that?
Dylan, I hated it. But I thought he was, I
He was
thought he
good.
was great. The girl who played Joan Baez, spectacular.
Yes.
There was one good moment in the film for me. First of all, I lived through that whole thing, and I don't remember anybody ever being awake in the daytime, and yet 90% of the film is shot in the daytime on the streets of Greenwich Village. Nobody was awake at that time. So, there's so much is not right, but what they did get right was at the end of the film when Elle Fanning, who's playing Susie Rotolo, is his girlfriend, and
Mhm.
meanwhile, he's with, Joan Baez, and on screen on stage, he and Baez have this magic, and so Dylan invites, Susie to come see him at Newport,
Yes,
and they
yes.
they had their troubles, they're breaking up, and she doesn't want to be a part of that, but she comes, and she's standing behind the fence watching, and she sees Dylan and Baez, Chalamet and that wonderful girl who played, Baez, who's also in that Crime 101. She walked away with that movie. Um, she sees what they have and realizes that she can never have that with Dylan, because his life is up there on that stage. And I thought, "Yeah, that's right. They got that right." But the
Mhm.
rest of it, I mean, it's like the Jolson story, if I've had the pleasure of seeing that, or Yankee Doodle Dandy. I mean, these films, they're fiction.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah, but
you
what's
know,
fun I think that Shyamalan I think that happened with a couple of the movies that I've seen where the films are never gonna be great, but I guess the question is how the actor, um makes a historical record of the musician, you know, and I think that Shyamalan did a great job. I think the, Austin Butler and Elvis did a great job, and I just started the Springsteen movie last night that I could not get through, but the opening scene, I thought, of the '81 river p like, closing, I thought that that choreography and, Jeremy Allen what was his name? Jeremy Allen White, I believe?
I think
I thought that his Springsteen mannerisms and face and, like and the hand motions, the gesture, and the energy, and, like, even the leg kick at the end, I thought that they did a really good job recreating the '81 scenes, but the movie itself, I was like, "I can't this is tough, man." It's tough to watch.
there's a genre of films of biographies. You've got Michael Jackson coming out.
Mhm.
That film, God only knows what that's going to be. Um, where's Michael? He's with some kid. I don't know what they're going to do with that film, but their responsibility. The reason why they don't work generally is because their responsibility is to film and not to music. And that skews everything in a weird way. I mean, my feeling, why go see Springsteen, the film? There's so much of Springsteen on YouTube, the
Mhm.
real thing. Why go
Yeah,
see the Dylan film? I have to sit through all that BS when you can see Don't Look Back, the great Pennybaker film, and nothing can reach that in
yeah.
terms of who is Bob Dylan. Ronaldo, even Ronaldo and Clara. I mean, there's so much of the real stuff, which when they made the Jolson story, Yankee Doodle Dandy, all those, the Cole Porter, you didn't have that other outlet. So the films became the film of record. Making a Springsteen film to me, and then releasing a soundtrack album of the guy singing Springsteen songs. What? See, if you had a studio system, that would never happen. Not that I have a
You
lot of, you know.
you don't so I tend to agree with your sentiment and that way of thinking. The only thing that I would say is that it can help I know that for myself, because I'm 30, right? I'm a self-taught, old soul,
I'm
and
32.
one of the way Sorry?
I'm 32.
There you go, you're looking. And, and, and I'm self-taught with all this stuff, and the way I come across a lot of this stuff is actually through covers, right? So, for example, I've been into the Grateful Dead a lot in the last couple of years. The way I got into the Dead was I heard a cover of Springsteen's Atlantic City by a Grateful Dead cover band, right? And I'm like, "Wow, this is really cool." And my friend goes, "If you think that's cool, check out the Grateful Dead." I'm like, "Who are they?" And he's like, "That's the band they're covering." And so I stumbled into this whole universe that I got exposed to through a cover, you know, that wasn't even, like, the cover, right? The band's cover is, like, the cover for Atlantic City, but, you know, that this band did it, and then I stumbled into this whole universe, and the same thing happens with I'm listening to Billy Strings, and all of a sudden, I find myself on a Doc and Earl Watson record, and I say, "How'd I even get here?" But, I think that you're right in as far as the sentiment goes, but as far as exposure, I have a lot of friends that watch these movies and have now been turned on to Dylan and now been turned on to Springsteen, and then they'll say, you know, "I don't like Dylan's voice." I'm like, "Well, go to this, and this live recording, and go try this album from this year because it sounds pretty different throughout the years." And, you know, but it's a journey for a lot of people to discover this art, and however they get there, I'm happy to have different avenues for them to figure it out.
I mean, yeah, any way that gets people to the people they should get to is legitimate.
Mhm.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was driving up to my house upstate, and I was with a young girl in her 20s before you call the police. And I
Where
said, "You want
upstate
to
was
hear?"
this?
New York,
Yeah, yeah, well,
upstate.
I'm from Rockland.
Greene County is where my house
Okay,
is.
very nice.
Woodstock, around there.
Gotcha, yeah.
So I said, "You want to hear some music?" And this is a young girl in her late 20s. I said, I'll put the iTunes thing on, the Wi-Fi thing.
Mhm.
I put it on. Bob Dylan comes on. She says, "Oh, that guy's voice hurting my ears. Take that off." And, crushed.
Yeah.
Almost went off the turn. I just, voice of a generation. How things have changed. It's just still is hurting her too. So things change.
They definitely do. They definitely do. Um, can we I wanted to just also say about Jack Nicholson, I'm curious your thoughts on this, and then we'll kind of transition on, but, um Jack Nicholson to me, represents also the shifting of the creative power in Hollywood from directors to actors, and he was kind of the bridge between the creative force behind the camera and then the people on the camera, and he really led like what you said, and it almost takes a misfit to be able to do something like that, to
Yeah, to be
cross over.
different. Uh, um,
Yeah, yeah, but
but
he embodied authenticity and real darkness in, like, people that film felt like it was not popular to touch unless you were an amateur filmmaker. Like, he embodied just so many different aspects of the human psychology throughout his acting that a lot of people weren't necessarily used to seeing portrayed on screen. I thought that was really, really cool too.
well, you see, he doesn't come from nothing. Uh, During the studio era, actors and actresses were trained how to act for the screen. The studios, it's such a fascinating subject, the life inside of a studio. I mean, you lived there. It was like a college campus. You did everything there.
Mhm.
Warner Brothers um, had a whorehouse on their premises because they didn't want their actors to uh, make any outside women pregnant because of the scandal.
No way.
So they just and who peopled the whorehouses? Starlets. It was part of their deal was, "Oh, you're gonna have to do this kind of thing." In those days, you could get away with that. So, along with their sex lives, they were also trained in a certain way. And if you look at actors during the studio era, Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant,
Mhm,
John Wayne,
mhm.
Ronald Colman, all these classic actors, the women too, all those women who came out of those movies, they all acted a certain way, which you could describe as playing for the camera and external. Here's what happened. All those great actors were conscripted or volunteered to be in World War II
Mhm.
during the greatest generation era. 5 years later, when they came out, they were either shell shocked, like Jimmy Stewart, or they had been physically wounded, or they had age. They had lost what they had as leading men. So there was a gap. There was a vacuum of a need for leading men.
Fascinating,
So where
fascinating.
did they go? Where did Hollywood go? They went where they always went, to Broadway. But Broadway had become methodized through Kazan and Tennessee Williams. It was a new kind of Broadway. And the actors that they got from Broadway were not playing for the camera, they were playing for Stanislavski. And so you had who came out of that? Montgomery Clift, Marlon Brando,
Al Pacino, no?
later, James
Later.
Dean.
Yeah.
Yeah, those three, Clift, Brando, and Dean, revolutionized what you could do on screen, playing these pained, sensitive, beautiful men who made everybody in the audience love them in a way that Cary Grant didn't. Cary Grant, certainly everybody loved him, but there was a kind of a different kind of worship there. Um, Out of them came De Niro, came Pacino, in the next generation,
Sure, sure.
um, or the Great Escape guy,
Mm. I don't
uh,
know.
those guys. Um, but only a very Warren Beatty, only a few of them could do what you're saying. Most actors did not have that kind of power. If you were a character actor, you were a character actor. If you were a leading man and with a comedic bent, that's what you did. If
Mhm.
you were a dramatic, dark looking actor, mean, that's what you played. So it was only guys like Brando, Cliff, and Dean, and later on De Niro and Pacino, and Beatty. They all were able to call their own shots, but whenever they deviated from what audiences wanted, their films didn't do well. So there was a de facto categorization, typecasting, or even for the biggest actors. When
Sure.
De Niro tried in The King of Comedy, where he
Mhm.
played that comedic
Was
lunatic.
that a Scorsese movie too?
Yeah, Scorsese
Yeah,
movie,
that's right. That's right. Yeah,
and Jerry Lewis is in it.
right.
Sandra Bernhardt, Sandra Bernhardt? Yeah, I think that's her name. Very, very funny. The film bombed. I mean, it laid a golden egg. It wasn't until years later that it gained a reputation as being a wonderful film, and it's a pretty good film. But as soon as De Niro tried to shift into something else besides the brooding, method, wounded,
Godfather. Yeah.
sensitive guy, it didn't work. So even then, there was a limit. The only difference between the studio system and then was in the studio system, if you didn't want to do a film and you were under contract, you were suspended until you agreed to do the film. In modern filmmaking, if you don't want to do it, you move on to the next thing. There's no one to say you can't. So that's kind of the power difference.
Right. I gotcha. Cool.
Steve
Well,
McQueen.
Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk about Disney. I'm really excited about this because, I've been a Disney behind the scenes fan and how the company works and the backstory for a long time fan for a long time, and I've read a lot about it. But I've never, until recently, been exposed to the notion of his working with governments. I mean, I have heard during World War II that he'd make these animations, help with propaganda purposes, but I didn't know much about it until I recently saw that a guy, I don't know if you've heard of him, Mike Benz online, is excellent. And he does a whole thing about the CIA and their investment in, throughout different entities and including entertainment. And he was being advised through Bank of America, and then while they were purchasing the land for Disney World, through a lot of CIA assets and actual players that have been involved in various schemes for a very long time. But I don't know much about, his politics and his relationship to the FBI that I know that you wrote about, and I do wanna actually ask because I did do, Google on this. It looks like you got a little bit of flashback for the work that you did about that. So I wanna ask
Well,
about that, and I wanna ask about the actual content, and we can go wherever you want because I'm having a ton of fun listening to you. So wherever you wanna go with this.
well, first of all, when you get what did you call it?
Flashback.
A flashback. That's not bad. I mean, that's something that means people are reading you, people are
Yeah.
listening to you. Here's what happened. After I wrote Death of a Rebel, and I did two or three other books, really wonderful books. One of them was called Rockonomics, which was a financial history of rock and
Yes, I
roll,
wanted to talk yeah, yeah.
which
Maybe we'll do
is
another one about that.
great book, if I can say so myself, because it dispels all the myths and tells you what the business was,
Sure,
how it
sure.
happened. Anyway, then I got the only time in my career, I got a writer's block of monumental proportion. A couple of years where I just I couldn't follow Death of a Rebel with anything that was that important to me. And then one day I was reading Truman Capote's the biography of Truman Capote, a very big, definitive book. And I thought to myself, who cares about Truman Capote, first of all? And how can you write 800 pages on him? And what did he do? He wrote one short story and one gruesome book about a murder. I mean, what did he do? He went an awful long way on a very short string of success. But I read it and I thought, wow, it's really impressive. And I thought, I want to write a book like that. I want to write a big, sprawling, warts and all. I mean, the Capote book had leprosy. That's how many warts there were in that book. I said, I want to write a book like that. And somehow the name Walt Disney came to me. I don't know how, but I thought, Walt Disney, what do we know about Walt Disney? Well, we know two things: Mickey Mouse, and we know who he is because of his TV show, Walt Disney Presents or Disneyland, whatever it was called in the 50s.
His persona is very tailored.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody knew who he was. The only other director I could think of at the time who had that was Alfred Hitchcock
Mhm.
because of his TV show. So I thought, well, yeah, that's a good starting point. Um, People who you don't know who you know, because of their image rather than who they are.
Right.
So I wrote a proposal, and my desperate agent, "Hey, when are you going to do something?" Sent it to a very big publishing house, and I met with the editor, and he said, "So this you want to do what Gerald Clark did with Truman Capote?" I said, "If you mean write a real book, yes." He said, "Okay, you can do it." And here's what happened.
Is that considered risky? Was that considered risky for the person on the other end of it that's, signing up? Is that like do they consider themselves signing up for trouble at that point?
Probably. I
Okay.
mean, whenever you try to tell the truth instead of do PR, you go through a legal vetting thing, which is a nightmare. You think that this absolutely needs to be in there, and they say it absolutely can't be in there. But here's what happened. I called up. I was living in LA. I called up the Disney studios and I said, I would like to go into your archives. The archives are run by a fellow Dave something, who his job was to keep the archives going. The archives at the Disney studio in Burbank is underground. They keep it
Mhm.
in like a temperature vault, and they've got all the negatives. They got the entire history and all
Yeah.
the.
It's legendary.
And I said, look, I'm writing a big biography for a major publisher, and I want to get the real story. At this point, I had no real opinion about Walt Disney, except I was skeptical that he was everybody's uncle. I thought that whole thing was a little bit calculated, Uncle Walt. Um, so I went to the studio. They were great. Oh, come on in, Mr. Elliot. Oh, we're so happy you're here. And we're going to take you into the archives and you can have anything you want, except there's only one small thing we want you to do for us. Well, what's that? We'd like you to sign uh, a contract saying that we have final say over the book.
Sure. By the way, what year is this? I'm sorry. Or around what year?
Uh, 90,
Got it. Okay,
19.
so, that's, Michael Eisner was the CEO at that point? Or not yet?
Yeah, Michael Eisner was there.
Gotcha,
Uh,
okay.
I didn't get to meet him, but the funny thing was, so they escorted me off They actually called security and
No way.
escorted me off the studio grounds. Well, Hollywood is so crazy. The next day, I went back, and they had no fences. You could just walk onto the studio. So I walked onto the studio, I went into the animation building, and I talked to everybody in there, and they had what, Disney had what they called the 9 Old Men, based on the Supreme Court. They were the big animators, the guys who
That's right.
were there from the beginning. I talked to every one of them, and,
Wow.
everyone who was still alive, um, and, they were great. Now one of them said, "You ought to talk to this other guy who Disney fired." Um Arthur Babbitt was his name.
Sure. I remember I know that name. Yeah.
Yeah, great animator. Babbitt was, living in a small house. I went to visit him. His nickname was, Stick, the Stick, because he was so skinny. And he told me a story about Walt Disney that, blew my head off. Um, Babbitt had drawn Snow White based on a real person, a real actress, and that actress was, Marge Champion. Well, she became Marge Champion, Gower Champion's wife later on. But her first husband was Art Babbitt. And Babbitt said that when he started dating Marge, Disney had him thrown into an insane asylum. And
Had
that
art thrown in?
yeah, he had him
Okay.
locked up because he said anybody who would do that to Walt Disney is obviously crazy.
Wait,
It
do what to Walt Disney? I'm sorry. Can you I don't understand
have
maybe.
an affair with, Snow White.
Oh, he was
He
dating or
wasn't
married to the
married
girl.
to her yet, but he did eventually marry her. But
Gotcha. He was dating the girl that was the role model for Snow White, and Disney had to throw
he
him into
was
an insane asylum.
sleeping with her, and everybody knew it, and Disney went into a rage about it, and he thought, "This
Okay.
guy has to be crazy." And so he had him locked up, and he was also a bit of a rebel in his own way, but very creative. He never worked in Hollywood again,
Wow.
back when he got released. He was blacklisted from Hollywood, and he said to me, "If you really want to know the story of Walt Disney, get a hold of this FBI file, under the Freedom of Information Act. I'm sure
Oh,
there's a
yeah.
lot in there." Took me 2 years to get that file. I hired a girl, to work for me whose only job was to get that file, and she was amazing. I don't know how she did it. This girl was great. The file was the size of the Manhattan phone book,
Wow.
and it was largely redacted, and it had things in it that were astonishing. Most of all, and if you have the book or you look at the book, the back of the book is a page from the files that identifies Walt Disney as an FBI agent, SAC, and agent contact. In the files, and it's heavily redacted, but there was enough there, like the Epstein files. There was enough there to show that what Disney was doing was allowing the government to come in and go through the files, the employment files of everybody at the company to make sure they didn't have subversive connections. Disney
This was
was
a huge anti-communist point in time, right?
to the right of Attila the Hun, as they say. I mean,
Right.
first of all, he didn't like Hollywood when he arrived in 1922 to be an animator because he began at Universal as an animator and he created Oswald the Rabbit.
Right,
And
got
then
stolen.
stole from him, and that's how Mickey was, created because he wanted to have his own character, but he blamed it all on Jews. That was the thing with, Disney.
Disney did. Do we have a record of that?
It's in the files, and in the people I interviewed. Here's why. all the studios were run by Jews, mostly, except one or two, but most of them, all the power. And there are a million books about why Hollywood was Jewish and they
Sure,
couldn't get
sure.
into any other
Yeah.
corporation, all of that. And he was not. And so he felt that he couldn't break in because he wasn't a member of what did he call it? The old boys club, the European boys club.
Mhm.
And there was probably some truth in that. There's some level of truth that, who is this guy? We don't trust them. They don't trust us. And so it was a kind of a mutual thing. So he started his own studio and he did something. All the people who flashed back on the book seem to forget that I called him a genius in the book and pointed out some fantastic things he did. He created the 3-minute cartoon with Mickey Mouse, Steamboat Bill and all that, without dialogue. And the reason he did that was so he could sell them all around the world. Every country could buy a Disney cartoon without dialogue, just
Awesome.
with music. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And so that's how he made his money. And as he made all this money, his real goal was to make a feature animated cartoon, which
Mhm.
turned out to be Snow White. His brother, uh,
Roy.
Roy, was the business end, and Roy,
Yes.
no matter what Walt wanted to do, Roy would say, "You can't do that. Ah, you're crazy. We're gonna go broke. No."
Yeah. Yeah.
And they went ahead, did it, and of course, made history. But when Disney formed his own studio, he really wasn't an artist. If you want to call him something, you call him a visionary. Um, the real artist was a fellow called Iwerks that nobody has ever heard of.
I think you wrote a book. I think I read a book by him.
Yeah, he may have
It's a
later
short
on.
book. It wasn't very good. I didn't like it very much, rather. It didn't speak to me, I think I've read it before. Yeah.
They were partners in the studio, and the name of the studio was Iwerks Disney. One day, Disney said to you know, uh, oh no, the name of the studio was Disney Iwerks. That was the name of the studio. And one day Disney said, it sounds like we make glasses. Disney Iwerks. It doesn't sound like a studio. So would you mind very much if we change the name to the Disney Studios? And who was really a very talented technician. He created the
Mhm.
triplane, so he did a lot of wonderful stuff. He didn't know any better. Uh, and so he agreed to it and put himself into permanent oblivion. Only
Yeah.
people who are interested in animation know who, on a deeper level than cartoons going, know who he
Like
was.
Wozniak to Steve Jobs almost.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That even less so than that. Like the guys who were partners on Facebook, those guys.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but that's who Disney was. He was a kind of a conniving genius. And when the war was about to break out, World War II, Disney was an America firster. He didn't want the country to go to war. Why? Not because he was a fascist, and not because he liked Hitler the way that Lindbergh did, who was also anti war, but
Mhm.
because his market was overseas. And
Ah.
that's where he made all his money. So you go to war with Germany. Germany was a huge market for Disney. They loved his cartoons. And so
Mhm.
he didn't want to go to war. And in his head, he blamed Jews for the war.
Wow.
Of course, the Holocaust and all of that, which came out later, he felt proved his point that they were the enemies. And also the Jewish cabal, as he referred to it in America, was going to make money off of the war and
Mhm.
other people. So so he decided that the only people who wanted to go to war were the communists because they were the avowed enemies of the fascists. And that's where the whole anti-communist thing begins. Uh, he formed various groups. He helped um, anti-going to war groups. He formed. He helped form the first HUAC investigations. He which didn't go very far during the war, but after the war, Hollywood committed suicide, and he was one of the people behind all of it. Then,
Wow.
when he was called to testify, and this is all in the file, he named 3 animators who he said were communists. One of them was a fellow, Silberman, who had gone to the Moscow Art Conservatory in the '20s to study art, communist. I found him living in a cold water canyon in the suburbs or in the woods outside San Francisco, never worked again, he and his wife. Silberman kept a scrapbook of the big strike in 1940, at the time, the biggest Hollywood strike. We and here's where the Uncle Walt thing comes in. I said to Silverman, "Can I copy this at Kinko's?" "Well, okay, yeah, go ahead." So I dragged all this stuff to Kinko's. I stood there while they hundreds of pages, took it back with me, and it is even the people who hated the book begrudgingly acknowledge that I did the best strike story, of what took place during that strike. Essentially, this is what it was. Disney was anti-union, the same reason.
Mhm.
He equated unions with communism, and he felt that his studio was a family, and so he wanted people to call him Uncle Walt because you can't go on strike against your family. You can't complain to a family member. I'm your uncle. You don't need to join a union. I'll take every care of everything. Well, they went out on strike. The strike lasted 9 months, and the only way it was settled was that Roy, the business end, got Nelson Rockefeller to send Disney to South America on a goodwill tour
Right.
pre-war. And while he was away, Roy settled the strike, which
Wow.
uh,
That
which
is that when he got into all the nature stuff? I think that was around the time he started doing all the nature documentaries, right?
that a little later, this is when he did the Three Caballeros,
Mhm. Right, right, right.
all the Latin stuff. The nature stuff came with TV a little bit later. Uh, and so that split the brothers. They put something, but Roy, Walt never forgave Roy for settling that strike. If you look at films that were made during it, like Dumbo, watch
Mhm.
Dumbo again, and you'll see there's a group of men working for the circus who are kind of strikers. It's a
Mhm.
very look at it again. It's an incredibly telling film. Look at Bambi with no father, which goes back to another part of Disney's life. But in 1949 or 50, Disney wanted to open up a an amusement park called Disneyland. He wanted to open it in Burbank, right next to the studio. Burbank is about 5 miles east of Hollywood. A lot of the studios were there. Most of them were there. Warner Brothers, Columbia. Columbia was close to, and Universal. When Universal found out that he wanted to open up a studio near them because they were all near each other, they bought the land. It's infuriated Disney. So he wound up buying an orange grove in Anaheim, but he didn't have the money. So at the same time, ABC, the ABC network, which today is owned by Disney, but back then they couldn't compete with CBS and NBC and the Dumont network, which was the fourth network back then. And they needed content. So they made a deal with Disney. They would fund Disneyland in return for having access to his library of films, which would give them content. And
Mhm.
Walt said, "I'll make that deal if I can host the show." And that's how Disney became everybody's Uncle Disney in TV land, how he funded Disneyland coming out of HUAC and kind of whitewashing his image in Hollywood by being this avuncular TV host, saved ABC from going out of business with that Sunday and then Wednesday night show. So it's a great saga. And you, in my opinion, you can't write a book about anybody if you don't tell the whole story. There's another guy who wrote a Disney book after me. I'm not going to mention his name because I threatened to beat him up at a party. Uh, because what he did was he went to Disney and said the same thing. I want to go into the archives. And they said, well, you have to let us see it. And he did. He let them really write the book for him, in return for which he wrote a less acerbic account. And okay, fine. If people want to read that, let them read it. Then he started going on TV shows and putting my book down. Unlike Eliot's book, my book. So I
Oof.
happened to run into him at a party. Come here. Can I want to talk to you for a second? I got a little rough with him, not physically, but I said to him, if you mention my name again in any way connected to your book, I will break your neck. All right, okay, all right, okay. And he's kind of a meek, kind of a schmuck, jerk. Um,
You call him a schmuck,
and
that's
then
fine.
yeah, schmuck. Schmuck is actually closer to what he is. Uh, he never again mentioned my book, because you could, you when these things come on, Google tells you this, and, he just his whole demeanor changed, after that. Not to say that I'm a tough guy or something, but it's so outrageous, the politics behind the Disney book. But, Disney hired when my book came out, the daughter, hired
Diane?
yeah, Diane Disney, hired a PR group to discredit the book. And the week the book came out, they issued essentially, a book attacking everything in my book, but and distributed free to everybody, but never sued me, never
Can't,
brought
right?
any action against
You don't
me.
want Discovery.
Yeah, that's right. And also the wife was still alive, Lillian Disney, so and she's in the book. They knew they couldn't sue because they knew it was true. So the only thing that they had was
To
character
discredit.
assassination.
Yeah.
And,
Well, we see that everywhere, huh?
yeah, that turned into a whole other situation, but the New York Times called me and said, "Can we see, the Disney file? Can we see it?" Yeah, I said, "I'll send it to you, but please send it back to me." They got it, and they wrote 2 pieces justifying everything I said in the book was essentially true. One was on the
Nice.
op-ed page, and one was by Russell, their famous, editorial, Russell Baker, wrote this, piece talking about the book. What happened was, they then hired a reviewer for the book review, the Sunday book review, and he trashed the book based on the Disney thing. But even he said that the stuff about the strike was great. So,
Mhm.
you know, um, what I learned from all of that is that, when you write a book about Walt Disney or any of those icons, you can't really write that book because you
Yeah.
have to overcome the image that they've spent a century building. And they're now, a mega corporation. They now own ABC among a million others. You have to either not write that book or go in and take your lumps. So at that time, I was coming out of a writer's block. I did not go into the book wanting to trash him, but it was Silverman, who had been mentioned in the what Disney's testimony. All three of the artists he mentioned never worked again. Who said, "Get the look at the strike stuff. This is who Disney was." Disney hired thugs, strike breakers. One of them wound up working for, it was in Reagan's cabinet. So some of the stories are so great that you really can't go into here. But it taught me a lot about how to write a biography as opposed to how to writing hagiography. There's a
Mhm.
big difference. And then, of course, I got involved in the OJ case, which was a nightmare, but my biggest book, because I had the goods. And then I wanted to, I said, finally, after 2 years of that, I want to write a book where nobody is going to put me on the witness stand and nobody is going to try to kill me. I said, what about it? I was living with a girl who had connections to Irving Azoff, who was the Eagles manager. So
Mhm.
I said, I'm going to write a book about the Eagles. What harm can there be in that? Well, I said to her, I said, "Would send a fax over to Irving, telling him that I want to interview the Eagles." Well, we got a fax back 10 minutes later. Tell your boyfriend, and not only will he not talk to the Eagles, but he won't talk to anybody living in Los Angeles. I will make sure. I mean, and it was just war all over again. It was another battle that began a war, and I spent 2 years battling them. Finally, the book, this is a great this really this you'll leave this in, I'm sure. The book was done, and they were protesting it, here's why they were so angry, among other things, including Don Henley's, mania for privacy, which he sees as some kind of measure of authenticity. But you had Warner Brothers, right? And all kind of attachments, Warner Books, uh,
Mhm.
Little
The
Brown,
record label. Yeah.
Warner Records. At the top, Warner Films. At the top
Mhm.
of the pyramid, the biggest moneymaker, the biggest single moneymaker in the history of Warner Brothers was the Eagles.
No way.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
And till
absolutely.
today, I bet. They're doing the Sphere now, and I can't imagine how much money they're bringing in,
Not
selling
an
out the
empty
residence.
seat since they started that. Billboard lists the attendance every week, not an empty seat.
It's incredible.
It's gonna be a film, and they're going back on tour, their ninth, of retirement, post-retirement tour. That's what they
They
do.
almost as many as Elton John.
That's right. Or The Who, they're the champion. So they said, "You can't publish this book because we're all Warner Brothers." Hey, the publishing division is independent, we can't stop them. And the book was already in galleys, which is a proof copy, a printed proof copy that goes out
Mhm.
to reviewers. Finally, I said, this has been going on since 1990. It's now 1997. I just want to go up to my house. I want to turn the phones off. I just want to catch my breath. The first morning I was there, my phone rang at 7 o'clock in the morning. I said, I really, it's just too much for me. Uh, uh, I picked it up. Is this Marc Eliot? Yeah. So hold on for David Geffen.
Whoa,
Yeah.
sweet.
Well, I'm on the phone. Another girl comes on. Said, Mark Elliott. Okay, David's coming. Hold on. Finally, three assistants down. David gets on the phone. Mark, how are you? How's everything? I've never met him, even though he's in the Eagles book. He had refused to be interviewed. I said, "What do I owe this lovely phone call to?" And he said, he said, I read your Eagles book, and I have to tell you, it's terrific. However, you left a couple of things out. Now, bear in mind, 2 things. First of all, the book was embargoed. There was no way he could get a copy of the book, but he was David Geffen, and so
Yeah,
he
there's
got
no
a
way he
copy.
couldn't get a copy of the book, actually.
That's right. I mean, I couldn't get a copy. What I discovered writing the book was that Geffen and Henley hated each other, uh, hated each other, and the reason they did was because when Henley and the Eagles signed with Geffen, Geffen was creating an independent label called Asylum. The allure for the Eagles, who considered themselves anti-corporate, we don't want to
Mhm.
be part of the machine. We want to be independent. And Geffen said, "Well, I'm the guy. I'm the guy who will give you all of that." So they signed with Asylum. They made an album, Desperados, the album. Everything was fine, and then Geffen sold the album, sold the label to Warner Elektra,
Yes,
which merged, became Warner Elektra Atlantic Asylum.
that's right.
And suddenly Don Henley finds himself working for the biggest corporation in music. And he
Oh,
and he
man.
blames David Geffen. And so they get into all kind of lawsuits because he also had a solo contract with Geffen. He didn't want to give him the solo stuff, and Geffen, I'm taking you to court. You have to give me these records. So when Geffen, so when I wrote the book, I didn't know any of that. I wrote the book the way I could. Geffen says to me, "I'm going to tell you some things that nobody knows that need to be in your book." I said, "Well, you have the book in front of you. It's already written. Don't worry about that. I'll call your publisher. We'll work the whole thing out. Just listen to me and listen carefully." Flip the tape recorder on. I spoke to him for a week. 1 week, every morning he would call me. Now, don't forget, 7 o'clock my time, it's 4 o'clock in the morning in LA. That's David Geffen, 24 hours.
Yeah, that's
By
right.
the time the week was over, my eyes were open. And I say to the publishers, I have all this new information I want to put in. Well, they say, well, the book is already written. Then Irving Azoff, the manager of the Eagles, called the publisher and said, "We understand that Mark talked to David Geffen. Is that true?" And my publisher says, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we're going to redo the book." So Irving Azoff says, "Well, you can't redo the book unless Mark talks to Don Henley." So the guy who swore I would never be able to step foot in Los Angeles, they wound up all talking to me. And I rewrote the whole book. It took another
Wow.
year. And they paid me again, which big money. They paid me again to agree to pull the book, rewrite the whole thing, and release it. Henley, I spent a lot of time with him, with all the living Eagles. It was a different book. It was fantastic, and still he wasn't happy because Henley wanted me to take out the story about the girl that overdosed in his house, and he actually went to trial, and they were going to put him in jail. He didn't want that to come out. I said, Why? It happened." He said, "I don't want my 97-year-old mother to read that." I said, Your 97 mother-year-old can read? She's going to be reading a rock book? Come on." Anyway, the book came out, raves, still in print to this day. You can go on Amazon and you'll see it's not only is it in print, but it's always high on numbers of rock books. It's always like 30, 20, 15.
Wow.
It's one of the biggest books I ever wrote. Um, so the life of a writer, I mean, that's how it goes. You have to be aggressive. You have to be either ignorant or fearless or both. Both
Mhm.
helps. And you have to want to be able to tell a story. But you get 100 artists in a room, and you get uh, David, the statue of David in Florence by Michelangelo,
Mhm.
and you say to them, here's the marble, here's the chisel, here's the hammer. These are all the tools that Michelangelo used. Make David. Point being that you can have all the training, you can have all the technical knowledge, but you also have to have talent. You
Mhm.
have to be able to make that magic leap into talent. So I got into biography because of Phil Oakes's death
Mhm.
and wanting to tell that story before someone came in and screwed it up. Um, and biography became my main, not my only subject, but my main subject. The last big one I did was Merle Haggard, which it's a five-star book. Everybody loves that book, and almost everybody, talked to me for it. And I'm working on 2 books now, not exactly biographies, but one is a movie book and one is a music book and a film book. So they're my 30th and 31st books.
Incredible.
Yeah, at the
Incredible.
age of 35, I've done all these books.
Wow, age of 32, ripe age of 32, and you've done all this, you know, I know we're out of time, I know we're a little over time. I would love to, do another episode with you if in a couple of months if you have the time, because I'm having so much fun with this, and, I just wanna ask maybe 1 or 2 last questions if you have a minute.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
do you thi man, there's so many good things over here. Circling back to Disney, do you think there's any reason to assume that, that the company stopped working with with the FBI and, giving that kind of internal information to the government at any point? I mean, one thing that is a famous sentiment is that once government or anyone gets power, it takes an awful lot for them to relinquish any of it, you know? And so, like, once a precedent is set, I imagine that the fear is that, that it could just keep on happening.
Well, um, first of all, it wasn't the company, it was Disney,
Okay,
individual.
okay.
Secondly, Ronald Reagan, I wrote a biography of Reagan called The Hollywood Years. That is
Mhm.
only about what he did before he became a
Ronald
professional
Reagan.
actor.
Right.
And it's a wonderful book. It's being made into a documentary now. Um, it shows you where all of his uh, abilities came from, mostly
Mhm.
from Jack Warner and Warner Brothers. It's a really wonderful story. Reagan also um, collaborated with the FBI when he was the head of the Screen Actors Guild, SAG.
Mhm.
When Reagan was asked about it, he said, "Well, of course I did it. It was the patriotic thing to do." See, and that's where the Disney people went off. They should have said, "Yes, he did," because he was doing it for the sake
Mhm.
of what he felt was his patriotic duty. Instead, they went crazy. No, he never did. Even though it said on every page in the file that he was a special agent SAC. What is an SAC? Special agent contact, which meant that the FBI had agents in all over Hollywood. That's a whole other story, the war between
Sure.
Hollywood and Washington. And they had contacts in every studio, and they would call them an SAC. So in their memos, they would say, to J. Edgar Hoover, regarding Walt Disney SAC, Walt Disney Special Agent in Chief.
Wow.
And if
Wow.
you see the back cover of the book, there's a page from the file that shows you Walt Disney SAC. So all the accusations that they made and all the lying and the covering up didn't hold any water
Yeah.
because I had the goods. If I didn't have the goods, believe me, they would own my country house today.
That's
Um,
right, that's right, that's right. Well, thank you. thank you really, sincerely for the great work that you've done and that you continue to do, and I love the mentality of not listen, we live in a world that is so dependent on people self-censoring out of intimidation and fear that it's really, really wonderful to hear someone say, look the machine in the face and say, "Hey, I don't know what you're talking about. I got the facts right here. You wanna fight with me about the facts? Fight with me about the facts, but, like, I don't know what you wanna say about this." And I know that it takes, I don't know. I'm beginning to learn very, very slowly, that there is an enormous amount of pushback for just pointing out the obvious a lot of times and pointing out reality. So thank you really, for the great work that you're doing and that you've done. And I really would love to record again in a couple of months, maybe when you have some more free time, but to dive into a lot more of the work that you've done because I'm having a really amazing time, and this conversation is exactly down my alley, and I would love to have a lot more of it.
All right. Well, yeah, happy to do it. I always like to. Nothing I like better than talking about myself. So,
There we go. Beautiful. I've noticed a lot of people have that in common. Anyway, Mark, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. This is really wonderful. Thank you.
you're welcome. Uh,